Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here again to sift through some pretty dense source material and pull out the core knowledge for you.
That's the plan.
Today, we're really getting into it. We're looking at self-discovery, marriage, societal pressure, a whole mix of big ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all sparked by some comments from Emma Watson, and more specifically, a critique of those comments.
Right. And our job here, our mission for this deep dive, is to really unpack the argument in that critique.
Mm-hmm.
It gets into this fundamental clash, doesn't it?
It really does.
This idea from Watson that you need to be fully ready, fully self-discovered before you commit to someone. Versus the critique's view, which is more like you figure things out by doing them, by taking on responsibility. It's introspection versus action, really.
Okay. So we'll lay out both sides, impartial as always, just trying to get to the heart of the philosophical.
Exactly. What does it mean to be ready? How do you get there?
Yeah.
That's what we're exploring.
And before we dive straight into the philosophy, you mentioned the source material itself had something interesting to say about how we even get these kinds of discussions.
Yeah, it's a bit meta, but interesting. The original interview with Watson, the one being critiqued, was really long, like 2.5 hours long.
Wow. Okay. That is long.
And the critic kind of riffs on this. They point out this trend, this almost unspoken pressure now for public figures to have these epically long conversations.
Oh, right. Like if it's not 2 hours plus, it's not serious.
Something like that.
Right.
Source suggests content creators might feel they have to go long, maybe fearing they'll seem shallow otherwise.
It's a strange dynamic, isn't it? We want depth, but who actually has time to listen to 5 hours on anything?
Exactly. And the critique's point is that it takes incredible skill. They mentioned Joe Rogan as maybe one exception to keep something that long, engaging, and coherent.
So the argument is forcing that length often just leads to or maybe saying things that aren't fully thought through.
Pretty much. It suggests that maybe some of the fuzzier philosophical points, the ones we're about to get into, might have been sharpened or even cut in a tighter format. It kind of sets the stage.
That makes sense. The medium affects the mess. Quantity over quality, perhaps.
Potentially, yeah. Or at least quantity influencing quality.
Okay, so that context is useful. It leads us right into section 1. This whole philosophy of delaying commitment until you're ready.
Right. The absolute core of this, the statement that sparked the critique, was Watson saying that if she'd married at any point before about a year ago.
Which puts her at, 34?
85.
Maybe.
It would have been carnage.
Carnage, that's a really, really strong word, like total destruction.
It is. It implies she wasn't just, maybe not perfectly suited, but fundamentally incapable of making it work until that point.
So what changed? What was the self-knowledge she felt she lacked before?
Okay, so she listed a few things. It's a mix of big existential stuff and some surprisingly practical points.
Let's break those down. What was the first one?
First, just generally, not knowing myself well enough yet. That's kind of the foundational idea in a lot of modern self-help thinking, isn't it?
Find yourself first.
Then, related to that, not having a clear enough idea of what my purpose, my vision was. Like you need a full life mission statement before you partner up.
Okay, purpose and vision. What else?
Then it gets into service, not knowing how I was going to be of service. So it connects the personal journey to a sort of contribution to the world.
Right, finding your role beyond just yourself.
And then the last one she mentioned was more grounded, almost logistical, not knowing where I really felt like it.
And that included?
That included figuring out where the people I love.
Okay. So those are the pieces she felt needed to be in place.
Yes. And this is where the source material starts its critique. It zooms in on some of these points.
Like what?
Well, for instance, the bit about figuring out where your loved ones live. The critique gets a bit sarcastic here, questioning why that specifically would take until age 35 to figure out.
Implying it's a fairly basic adult decision, not some deep philosophical puzzle.
Exactly. The source suggests that framing these things as massively complex reasons for delay might be less about genuine complexity and more about maybe self-absorption or just not making some core decision.
So the critique suspects the delay isn't about profound depth, but perhaps avoiding the basics.
That's the angle they take, yeah. And the ultimate goal of all this self-discovery, according to Watts, was to reach a point where she could present a very clear identity to a potential partner.
How does she put that?
Sort of like, Hi, I'm Emma. This is what I care about. This is where the people I love the most live. This is where it's meaningful for me to be in the world. A complete package.
Okay, presenting a finished self and the purpose of that.
The purpose, as she framed it, was so the partner could then decide if they can serve what she's trying to do, and importantly, she could serve what they are trying to do.
So it's a very intentional, almost service contract model of marriage.
Yeah.
two fully formed individuals aligning their predefined.
That's how it comes across. It's very structured, very pre-vetted, maybe.
Which is definitely different from the idea of two people kind of figuring out their path together in marriage.
Totally different. Here, the individual mission seems to precede the joint.
And the critique has thoughts on this language, the self-actualization jargon, as they call it.
Definitely. This is where they really push back hard. They find the language vague, a bit pretentious maybe, and fundamentally self-focused.
They challenge the whole idea that finding meaning needs to be this decades-long, super complex quest.
Right. They specifically pick up on phrases like finding where it's meaningful for me to be in the world.
And their take is?
Their take is sort of, well, if it's that hard to articulate where you find meaning, maybe the problem isn't the world, maybe it's the way you're trying to talk about it. Confused language reflecting confused thought.
That's a sharp point.
It is. The source basically argues that what often gets framed as incredibly deep, complex self-discovery, this intricate puzzle of who am I, might actually be, in their words, pretentious, narcissistic nonsense.
Ouch.
Yeah. It suggests the person convinces themselves they're incredibly complex, mainly because they just haven't made some basic life choices.
And this leads to that analogy they used, the Paw Patrol puzzle one. That sounds brutal.
It is pretty brutal, rhetorically. The critique says, look, some people spend years staring inward, thinking their identity is this massive 1,000-piece puzzle they need to solve.
Right. Challenge.
But the source argues, for many, the actual puzzle of who they are and what they need to decide is much simpler. They compare it to a Paw Patrol puzzle for toddlers with 4 pieces.
So deliberately minimizing the perceived complexity, suggesting it's manufactured.
Exactly. Manufactured perhaps to make the delay seem profound or necessary rather than just a delay. The core argument is that deciding where to live, who to commit to, how to contribute these aren't impossible riddles needing decades. They're
choices that get bogged down in overthinking and the need for absolute certainty.
That's the critique's perspective. And it raises that key question. Is the search genuinely this hard? Or are we making it hard to avoid the friction of just deciding and acting?
That idea of avoiding friction leads us perfectly into the next bit, doesn't it? The part about violence.
Yeah, section 2. This is where things get really heated, really controversial. The claim of violence.
So Watson described the pressure she felt people asking, when are you getting married? Or similar question, she called that pressure of violence and a cruelty, especially towards young women.
And the source's reaction to the word violence is strong.
How do they counter that?
Fundamentally, they argue it's a misuse, a degradation of the word. They emphasize that questions, even intrusive or annoying ones, are not physical threat. Nobody's being asked about marriage at gunpoint.
They're drawing a line between words and physical force.
Absolutely. They see it as crucial. And they bring in history, too. They mention things like actual shotgun weddings, where the pressure was significantly more tangible.
Right, times when marriage pressure involved real coercion.
And they argue that even back then, people didn't typically call the social pressure itself violence in the way the word is used today.
Mm-hmm.
If simple societal expectation is violence, they argue, then what about taxes or mandatory education? Where does it stop?
So it's a semantic argument, but with broader implications about how we frame social.
Exactly. And then they add another layer. Context. They argue that, objectively speaking, the pressure to get married today is considerably less intense than it's ever been for any generation.
Really less intense.
That's their claim. They'd say Western society now offers unprecedented freedom for individualism, late marriage, no marriage, without major social punishment.
Okay.
In fact, they argue there's often more pressure on young people, say, in their early 20s, not to marry yet. Focus on your career. Get your education sorted first. That's often the stronger message now.
So, if acceptance is higher, why label the remaining lesser pressure as violence? That seems to be the core question the source is asking.
Precisely. It leads them to identify what they see as a kind of pattern of complaint in modern culture. The observation that, paradoxically, as society becomes more accepting or accommodating of a certain choice or group, the complaints about the lack of acceptance sometimes seem to get louder, not quieter.
That's counterintuitive. Why would that happen?
The source suggests it might stem from a desire not just for tolerance, but for total validation, total affirmation. Anything less than universal celebration feels like oppression.
And they used that Statue of Liberty thought experiment to illustrate this. That sounded wild.
Yeah, it's very vivid. They say, imagine society bends over backwards. We have parades celebrating childlessness. We literally changed the Statue of Liberty to hold a cat and wine. Engraving childlessness is awesome on it.
Yeah.
Maximum possible societal approval.
Okay, got the picture. Absurd level of affirmation.
Even then, the source cynically suggests if one person gives Emma Watson a funny look or asks about marriage,
she'd still claim victimhood. still call it violence.
That's the implication, that the demand isn't actually for societal acceptance, which they argue largely exists, but for the complete absence of any friction, any question, any sideways glance, a demand for total emotional validation.
So the distinction they're drawing is between tolerance, letting people live their lives, and affirmation demanding everyone approve of or celebrate.
Exactly. And they argue that using words like violence for social discomfort is basically trying to enforce affirmation as a right.
And they connect this pattern elsewhere, too.
They do. The source explicitly mentions observing a similar dynamic, in their view, within the LGBT community. They claim that as acceptance grows, the whines and cries of non-acceptance only grow louder. Now, we're just reporting the source's claim here, not endorsing it.
Understood. Impartially presenting their argument.
But their overall point is that this pattern suggests the root issue might not always be external oppression, but maybe an internal need for constant validation that no society can realistically provide.
It definitely forces you to think, doesn't it? When does legitimate critique of social pressure cross into maybe demanding an impossible level of universal agreement? Redefining discomfort as violence certainly shuts down debate.
It does. And it's a perfect bridge to Section 3. Because it's all about how we handle friction and challenge, which leads to the core disagreement. How do we actually grow? How did that self-discovery happen?
Right. If Watson's model is figure yourself out first, then commit, the critique asks, okay, but how do you do that figuring out?
And they fundamentally reject the passive model. They argue you don't achieve growth or discover your mature self by just, sitting around thinking in a vacuum.
Or meditating or watching self-help videos or just wishing it into existence.
Exactly. They dismiss that whole approach. The idea that the answers are all just inside you, waiting patiently to be uncovered through quiet reflection. They say that's a fallacy.
So if not by thinking and reflecting, then how? What's the alternative they propose?
Action, responsibility, doing things. Especially doing adult things, taking on obligation, often before you feel ready. That's their core thesis.
So you don't wait until you're qualified. You become qualified by doing the thing.
Precise. Competence follows action. It doesn't precede it. And the source writer uses their own life as the prime example here.
Ah, right. The anecdote about becoming a husband and father young.
Yeah, at 25. And he's very upfront, admitting he was not mature enough. He didn't feel ready at all.
That vulnerability makes the point stronger.
It does. He says, look, if I'd waited to feel mature, to have that aha moment of readiness arise spontaneously,
He'd still be waiting.
He'd still be waiting now at age 39. He argues his maturity, whatever level he's achieved, was forged by the demands of marriage and parent. It was doing it day in, day out for 14 years, dealing with the challenges that made him qualify.
So it's a stark contrast. Wait until ready versus start before ready, and readiness comes struggle.
Exactly. And that struggle happens in what the source calls the crucible of responsibility.
The crucible sounds intense. What are the elements of this crucible?
Things we usually try to avoid. Friction, pressure, toil, work, obligation.
Yeah, not exactly selling points for the self-actualization crowd.
Not at all. But the source argues these uncomfortable things are the essential ingredients. They're the heat and the hammer that forge a mature personality.
And specifically an unself.
That's key. They argue maturity, competence, and especially the ability to be unselfish, which is crucial for a partnership. You don't develop those in isolation. You develop them when reality forces you to sacrifice, to compromise, to manage conflict when you'd rather not.
So avoiding the crucible means avoiding the growth.
That's the argument. You can't become a strong swimmer by avoiding the water, which leads perfectly to their swimming analogy.
Ah, yes, the pool analogy. How did that go?
You can't learn to swim by just standing by the edge of the pool for years. Right. Doesn't matter how much you read about swimming, watch videos, or psych yourself up for it.
Right. You can know the theory perfectly, but you still can't swim.
Exactly. You only learn by getting in the water, feeling the resistance, maybe sputtering a bit, figuring it out through the actual doing. Refusing to get in, refusing responsibility, just leaves you on the sidelines, unqualified.
And maybe even more scared than when you started because you've built it up so much in your head. That paralysis by analysis idea.
Could be. The fear of the carnage Watson mentioned might actually grow the longer you avoid the potential for it. You delay to gain certainty, but certainty never comes, and the delay itself inhibits the development needed to handle the challenge.
Which then leads to the final twist in the critique's argument, doesn't it? The idea that this whole delay strategy might actually backfire.
Yes, exactly. Section 4, the paradoxical outcome of delay. The critique argues that waiting all that time, supposedly to become perfectly prepared for marriage, actually achieves the opposite.
How so? What's the main negative consequence?
It boils down to habit. They argue that spending, say, 15 or 20 years of your adult life focused primarily on yourself, your needs, your schedule, your goals, your meaning, well, What you've actually been doing is practicing and deeply ingraining habits of, selfishness.
Ooh, so the self-discovery journey inadvertently becomes self-training.
That's the provocative claim. It's not necessarily malicious selfishness, but a deeply ingrained pattern of prioritizing because there's been no structural need to do otherwise for so long.
Can you give some examples of these habits?
Sure. Think about simple daily life, control over your time. For 2 decades, if you want to spontaneously go away for the weekend or stay out late or just have a quiet night in, there's no negotiation needed, no checking in about shared plans or someone else.
Okay, total autonomy becomes default expectation.
Right. Or money. That's a huge one in relationships. You get used to thinking, my money, life spending decision, all your income, all your choices are yours alone.
And then marriage requires.
Suddenly, it's joint accounts, shared budget, maybe sacrificing a personal want for a shared goal or necessity. And the person who waited until 35 has spent their entire adult life conditioning themselves against that very thing. It makes the adjustment potentially much harder, much more jarring.
So the theory is the person who married younger and had to learn compromise and financial negotiation early on sort of grew those skills organically.
Yeah, they learned it because they had to make the relationship work. The person who delays, according to this critique, might have to spend the early years of marriage actively unlearning decades of ingrained independence and self-focus, which could be way tougher.
So the delay, intended to prevent carnage, might actually make difficult adjustments and maybe even conflict more likely.
That's the core paradox they point out. The confidence gained from feeling finally ready might be a bit hollow. High confidence, maybe, but potentially low experience in the actual day-to-day grind of compromise and shared living. Makes you more brittle when things get tough.
It's a really challenging perspective. It suggests the very act of preparation, if it's purely internal and avoids external friction, is actually counterproductive.
The argument is that readiness isn't achieved by maximizing comfort and solitude, but by developing tolerance for discomfort and the ability to prioritize another person through practice.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping this up, we've definitely taken a deep dive today. We looked at this clash between needing to find yourself first versus finding yourself through taking on life's big...
Yeah, the self-actualization model versus the growth through responsibility, using Emma Watson's comments and the critique as a lens.
And it leaves us and you, the listener, with a pretty significant question to chew on, doesn't it?
It really does. That final provocative thought. If real growth, real maturity, truly requires that external pressure, that friction, that obligation, then does our modern focus on achieving perfect internal readiness before acting actually get in the way? Does it accidentally stunt the very maturity we need for things like long-term commitment?
Is meaning something you find before you commit to service in others, or is it something you discover in the act of serving and committing?
It's a fundamental question about how character is built.
So, for you listening, think about your own life. When did you experience your most significant growth? Was it during periods of comfortable introspection? Or was it when you were thrown into the deep end, facing a challenge or responsibility that forced you to adapt, to change, maybe to put someone else first?
You might find the crucible, the friction, the doing, while maybe uncomfortable at the time, was where the real transformation.
Something to definitely reflect on. That's our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.